All right, so get ready because we're going to dive into some pretty out there stuff today.
Sounds intriguing.
You've been exploring all these alternative spiritualities, right? And you sent us some audio that's, well, unique is one way to put it.
It definitely, yeah, it stood out.
So this guy, this self-proclaimed healer, he's all about clearing negative energy and entities,
Okay.
but he gets really specific about the entities he's talking about.
Like what?
Reptilians and Archons.
Oh, wow.
But here's the thing. His methods sound a lot like coding.
Coding. Really?
Yeah, like setting things to true or false kind of reminds me of, programming or something.
Oh, that's a new one.
He even throws in this tool he calls the source of rapture.
The source of rapture.
Have you ever come across anything like this before?
I mean, it's got this blend of new age and like conspiracy theory stuff, but that tech twist is definitely not typical.
Yeah, that's what really caught my attention too.
What I find fascinating is he's not just repeating the usual reptilian theories,
Hmm.
the ones about them controlling politicians and stuff. He's focusing on their spiritual impact, especially how they feed off this looch energy.
Looch.
Yeah, that's what he calls it.
Okay, so it's like he's taken this modern anxiety we have around technology and control and turned it into a spiritual narrative.
Right, it's like he's saying, hey, be afraid of reptilians, but not just because they're pulling the strings behind the scenes, but because they're messing with your energy.
Do you think he's doing this intentionally, or is it possible he's drawing on existing traditions in a way we're just not getting?
That's a great question, honestly.
Because the language he uses, it's so tech-heavy, like reptilian grids and archon firmaments that need to be set to false.
It definitely makes you think of hacking or programming or something
Yeah.
like that.
Right, exactly.
But to be fair, the idea of spiritual entities feeding off negative energy isn't new.
Yeah, like energy vampires.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
So this Looch, it's kind of like that, but within his specific framework.
It seems that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the fuel that these reptilians and archons supposedly need to survive.
And he talks about protecting yourself from this Looch, right?
Oh, yeah, he's got all these techniques for clearing and protecting yourself.
He talks about connecting your intent to your source so it can act autonomously like an immune system.
Like you could program your own spiritual defenses.
Exactly. It's pretty wild.
He even claims that reptilians see humanity as one consciousness, which makes us super vulnerable to their manipulation.
Wait, so he's saying they're not just going after individuals?
Nope, he's saying they're targeting all of humanity at once through this collective consciousness.
Wow. Okay. That's a whole other level of scary.
It is kind of creepy, right? It's like he took this idea of collective consciousness, which is usually seen as a good thing, this interconnectedness, and flipped it to show how it can be used against us.
It's like a hive mind situation, but not in a good way.
Definitely not in a good way.
That part really threw me for a loop. I mean, is he saying we're all doomed because we're all connected?
Well, he's not saying that outright, but it does raise some questions about how much control we really have over our own lives if we're all part of this bigger consciousness.
Like, if they can manipulate the whole thing, then where does that leave us as individuals?
Exactly. And how do we protect ourselves if we're all linked together?
It's like he's suggesting that individuality is an illusion and we're all just puppets for these reptilians.
Yeah, it's a pretty bleak outlook.
And then he throws in these other concepts that are even weirder.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
He mentions the Ark of the Covenant, disabling reptilian control, and then there's forgiveness energy, and this whole thing about human weaponry using phrases like love true and source true.
So he's mixing biblical stuff with new age ideas and then
Yeah.
throwing in some kind of spiritual combat language.
Yeah, it's like a spiritual arsenal with verbal codes to activate them.
It's definitely a unique combination.
But do you think there's any danger in framing forgiveness like this? Like within this context of reptilian control? Could it lead to people blaming themselves for things that are totally out of their control?
That's a really good point. Forgiveness is usually about letting go of anger and resentment. But if you're constantly worried about reptilians feeding off your negative energy, you might end up feeling like it's your fault if you're not feeling 100% positive all the time.
Exactly.
It could create this pressure to be happy and forgiving all the time, which isn't realistic.
Right, because sometimes bad things happen, and it's not your fault, and it's okay to feel angry or sad about it.
Exactly. And suppressing those feelings could actually be more harmful in the long run.
So we've got reptilians feeding off Lutch, this need to set our Archon firmament to false, and a spiritual toolkit with love true, and a sprinkle of the Ark of the Covenant.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Where do we even start to unpack all of this?
Well, I think the key is to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
What's the overall narrative he's trying to create here?
Yeah.
Well, I think to understand this guy, We got to look at his story. Like, what's the problem and what's the solution?
That's kind of like spiritual self-help, but for the digital age.
Yeah, exactly. He's taking these old ideas, making them sound all techy and modern, like something people who are into tech would get.
And tapping into that fear of the unknown.
Right, like those unseen forces that might be controlling us.
He seems really hung up on setting things to true, especially when it comes to our source.
It's like he wants to reprogram us from the inside out.
He even talks about turning spirit to human. What do you think he means by that?
That's where things get a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
He's saying that by connecting our spirit with the human part, we become stronger, less easy to manipulate. But what does that even mean?
Right. Is he saying we should, like, ignore our spiritual side?
He doesn't really say, does he?
Nope.
It's almost like he thinks those two things are fighting each other. You know, spiritual versus human.
It's an interesting take on that whole mind-body connection thing.
Yeah, that's been around forever. The idea that being spiritual means rejecting the physical world.
But this guy, he's saying we need to combine them somehow.
Make it practical.
Embodied spirituality or something like that. But he doesn't really give us any instructions on how to do that.
That's true. It's all very theoretical.
He throws out these terms like firmament true and aura true.
But no real explanation.
It's like a secret language.
Yeah, only for the initiated.
Okay, but let's go back to the source for a sec. It seems like that's the core of his whole system.
It's like the magic bullet.
So what do you think he means by source?
Well, it depends who you ask.
Yeah.
I mean, different spiritual traditions have different ideas about what that means.
You're right.
But for this guy, it seems like it's this well of power and wisdom that we all have inside us.
It's like our own personal guardian angel.
Yeah, or like an inner guru guiding us and protecting us.
But he also says it needs to be autonomous, like we have to give it permission to act on our behalf.
We got to activate it.
It's not just sitting there waiting to help us.
I guess switch it on.
So how do we do that?
Well, he mentions connecting our intent to our source.
But how? He doesn't say.
That's kind of frustrating, isn't it? It is a bit. Yeah, it's like he's showing us his amazing treasure, but he's not giving us the map.
Maybe he doesn't know himself.
Maybe.
Or maybe he wants us to figure it out on our own.
It's possible. I mean, some teachers believe that the real learning comes from the searching.
The journey, not the destination.
Exactly.
But regardless of why he's being so vague, people are listening.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely buying what he's selling.
That's like he's hit a nerve.
There's this hunger for spiritual guidance, even if it's weird and out there.
Totally. People want answers. They want to feel like they have some control in a world that feels increasingly chaotic.
And he's offering that sense of control.
But is it real control or is it just another illusion?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess that's the tough part, right? Figuring out what's real and what's not, what resonates with us and what's just noise.
He kind of talks about that, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Like, remember all that stuff about forgiveness and love true?
Uh-huh.
It's almost like those are his litmus tests, you know? Like, if something makes you feel more loving and forgiving, then it's probably good. It's in line with your true self.
And if it makes you feel like judging people and being afraid, then
it's probably not so good. It's probably a distortion of the truth.
So it's like we have this internal compass.
Exactly.
But we got to learn to trust it.
Right, because that's part of the battle.
This whole spiritual warfare thing.
Yeah, it's not about fighting demons and monsters out there.
It's about fighting the demons inside us.
The doubt, the fear, all that stuff that keeps us stuck.
Which brings us back to the Merkaba.
Oh, yeah, he loved talking about that.
Just symbol of consciousness.
Right.
He made it sound like it was the key to like winning this inner battle.
He didn't say that directly, but
he hinted at it.
yeah, he definitely sees the Merkaba as this higher level of consciousness, like a way to become more aware and powerful.
Remember, he called it one of the 3 big pillars of humanity love source and the
Yeah.
Merkaba.
Exactly.
So maybe he thinks they all work together.
Like, you need all 3 to reach your full potential.
So if we can tap into that love, connect with our source, and activate this Merkaba energy field,
We can break free.
transcend the limits of reality, become immune to all the manipulation.
It's a pretty powerful vision.
It is, but it's also kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
Like, if I start chanting firmament true, am I going to suddenly sprout angel wings and fly away from the reptilians?
Probably not.
Okay, good to know.
But maybe that's not the point.
What do you mean?
Maybe it's not about literal wings and flying away,
But
changing your perspective,
okay,
seeing the world differently.
not from a place of fear.
Exactly.
So instead of looking for all the
So you
answers,
got to focus on cultivating those qualities he keeps talking about.
love, forgiveness, awareness.
Those are the real keys.
So he's giving us the tools, but we got to do the work.
Right.
Figure out how to use them,
Make them our own.
integrate them into our own spiritual journey,
And that's where discernment is so important.
listening to our intuition,
Checking these ideas against our own experiences.
and figuring out what's true for us.
Exactly.
Okay, so we spent this whole deep dive exploring this guy's unique worldview.
New Age meets conspiracy theory.
With all this cryptic language and these big promises,
And we've gone deep into these concepts like Luch and Source and the Merkaba,
we've talked about the good and the bad of his approach.
the potential benefits and the potential dangers.
So what's your takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think it shows just how much we crave meaning.
Yeah.
We want to know why we're here, what our purpose is.
Especially in a world that can feel so chaotic.
Exactly. And we want to feel like we have some control over our lives.
And this guy, he's offering that.
He's saying, hey, here's a way to understand the universe, and here's how you can take back your power.
Whether we agree with him or not, he's definitely tapping into something real
This deep-seated need to make sense of it all,
and find our place in the cosmos.
it's a journey we all take in our own way.
He's definitely given us a lot to think about.
He has, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
It's challenged. Our assumptions make us curious, left us with more questions than answers.
And that's a good thing.
It is. It means we're still searching, still exploring, still learning.
The journey continues.
This deep dive's been a wild ride.
It has.
We've ventured into some strange territory.
Uncovered some hidden truths.
And maybe even discovered a few things about ourselves along the way.
Who knows what we'll find next?
So what resonated with you? What questions are you left with? This deep dive was just the beginning. The exploration continues.